All right. Hello. So we're going to get started. Just a wonderful group up here. Holy. Very, very special people. So, Gunaftish, we're going to have a talk on Kahudzi, Askutu Hudzishkashnik, and also the La Perouse discussion. So, just very wonderful. It's good to have these folks here. We give you our full attention. Gunaftish.
Hey, Ishmael, can we get 2 of those books back up here?
Okay, good morning. My name is Liz Dodd. I'm with Hazy Island Books, which I co-own with Kim Metcalf. We published in Sisterhood, and then a few years later we published the book that we're going to be talking about today, The Story of the Town Bear and the Forest Bear. And we published it in Tlingit, and then we published it in English. I have to apologize. I've been really sick all weekend. I have a cold, so I'm sort of running on 3 cylinders. I think normally I'm not really a V8, but, you know, I like to think of myself as at least a straight 6, you know, so I'm definitely a little bit tired and a little bit phlegmy. Okay, all right, let's meet our panelists. Paul Marks, Ernestine Hayes, the author of the book, Nora Dauenhauer, Richard Dauenhauer, Cassie Littlefield. Now we're in our translation part here. Nora and Richard and Cassie, Keri Eggleston, Roby Littlefield, Ethel Makinen, and then a teacher who's been using the book, Marcia Hodge. Thank you all for coming, being on this long panel. We're long in bodies and short in time, so we'll see what we can do with that. Just a little bit of background on the project. We were able to make this book and study guide and audio CD of the Tlingit version through a grant from the Association of Alaska School Boards. They brought us here today to talk to you about it, and we want to thank them immensely for their support. The project came about when Ernestine Hayes, a Juno author, mentioned that she had come up with this story and that she had received the patent to it, the story of the town bear and the forest bear, based on the old, the story of the city mouse and the country mouse, which some people may remember from years ago. And I said, that just sounds like such a great story. You know, she had adapted it to be, there's a bear living in the forest, and one day his relative comes out to visit him from the city. They start to hunt, fish, gather, dig roots, and the city bear at the end of the day goes, the city bear is not very good at any of these activities. The city bear has lost his ability to perform all these traditional activities. He said, at the end of the day, he says, you know, there's a much easier way to live than this. You need to come into town where I live, where every day there's a lot of food waiting for me in special bins. And, you know, you can eat as much as you want. And the forest bear becomes seduced by this idea and goes to the city, to the town with the town bear. And then it goes from there. Ernestine created the story out of her local experience. And then we talked about how this might be a really good thing to translate into Tlingit, since it's rooted in Southeast Alaska with our everyday experience, with children's everyday experience of dealing with these bears. And that it, of course, because Ernestine wrote it, it was infused with many traditional thoughts and values. I said, why don't we try and see if we can produce a Tlingit version that may become useful in the Tlingit curriculum in the schools. So we then proceeded to get some sample translations. We had an English text that Ernestine had written. I think I went at that point to Wanda Culp from Hoona, who illustrated the book. And she spent a year making like 25 original watercolor paintings that became the illustrations in the book. So anyway, so then we had to start to think about translations. I hadn't gotten the grant yet. I wanted to get some sample translations to take to grantors. So I was teaching a class at UAS, and Cassie Littlefield happened to be in my class, and she wrote on her orientation form that her second language was Tlingit. And I was like, okay, maybe Cassie can make some sample translations. I gave her the text, and she took it both to her mom, Roby Littlefield, and to the Tlingit Curriculum Committee at UAS. And so that's when I think Richard and Nora first saw the project. This consortium of people gave me back several translated pages, which I then used. I mocked up with the illustrations and was able to use those to get AASB to fund the full book. So that's sort of the history of, then let me just finish going over the history of the project. At that point, after we got the grant, then I in that process learned about this translation team of Roby Littlefield and Ethel Makinen. Ethel, am I saying your name right? Is it Makinen or Makinen? Makinen, good. I met with Ethel and Roby. We had a great meeting in Juneau. They were there for a teachers' conference, and they agreed to translate this entire text. And that began the long journey of translating this English text into Tlingit, Ernestine's original story into the Tlingit language. Then AASB basically paid to print a lot of copies of this, and we just sort of papered all the Tlingit language classes with this book, and it's been out there being used to various degrees in the Tlingit language programs. Now, what I'd like to do is to begin by just hearing from Ernestine a little bit about her process of creating this story, and then we're going to get into some of the translation issues. And then I'd like to hear a little bit from Marcia about what it's been like to use this book in her college class. And then I thought we'd just talk about, if we have time, and I hope we do, is to talk about some of the kind of authorial, is this a good kind of project to do, and what, if so, who should be doing it, and what are some of the lessons that we learned in this long process of creating this book. It basically took us about 3 years to get the project from the beginning to fruition. So, Ernestine, I'm going to give you the mic and let you say a few words about what it was like to create the book, and just any thoughts you have about the project.
Thank you, Ms. Gunniff-Chish. My years ago, I took a beginning Tlingit language course with Liz at the University of Alaska Southeast, and our term project was to take something in English and translate it into the Tlingit language, and that's how that was formed the foundation Later, I worked on the state ferries, and as a shipboard interpreter, and one of our tasks for that job was to have a children's program. And so I remembered that old story about city mouse, country mouse that we're all familiar with, and I turned it into something that could be locally applicable for children, all children of Southeast, and how we should treat our garbage and how we should look at the bears and so on. Years later, I decided to get a copyright of that story from Washington, D.C., and when Liz and I were having lunch one day, I happened to tell her that I received a copyright for that story, City Bear, Country Bear, and the rest of it Liz took. She had the vision of how it could be translated, how it could be used, and what could become of it. She got the grant, she put all the work together, she coordinated everything, she gave Wanda Culp, the illustrator, everything she needed. And so, apart from simply having written a little two-page story for children to begin with, my only other significant part in this was also happens to be something that I'm very happy I did and allow myself to take some pride in. That's the study guide. Liz and I had some discussions about some of the points that needed to be made in the study guide about how we view the world, about how we see not only our relatives, the bears, but also how we see the rights of berries and the rights of the worms who eat the berries and the rights of all other living things. And I think that that's infused in the book, and in the study guide it's brought out very clearly so that people who are working with the book can, I'm sure, agree with some of the cultural messages that are embedded in some of the stories we tell, even a story that comes from Europe or America that we can see through our lens and from our point of view and see the values that come along with the stories. So that's basically my role. Liz ran the race. I said, ready, set, go, and that was it. So, Gunnachish.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ernestine. What'd I hit? There we go. We're good again. Under the rule that you can't see the people closest to you, I forgot to mention that one aspect of this project involved the recording of an audio version of the Tlingit text, and that was recorded by Paul Marks and Florence Shakely and Roby. Cassie Littlefield speaks on there as well. So that was after we got the translations, we went into the studio to record this audio version, and that's where we began to discover that by asking Ethel and Roby to do a line-by-line translation of an English text, that in certain places in this story that we lost the kind of rhythm and voice of the Tlingit language. Very important lesson that we feel we learned in this project is it's better to ask the translator, tell the story as you would tell it, as opposed to trying to force a line-by-line translation. So anyone who is thinking about doing this kind of project, that is one of the key lessons. Now I'd like to give the mic to Roby Littlefield and hear just a little bit about how she and Ethel went about this translation process and some of the lessons they learned. Way down to Roby.
Gunnachish. Well, Ethel and I are real honored to be asked to do this project. It was a learning opportunity for both of us as well. We started off just reading the story so that we had the whole story in the back of our mind. Of course, this is in English, And then because we didn't know that we could have some artistic license, because we thought it was Ernestine's story, we didn't want to change any of the English words. So we went through this agonizing process of translating literally from English to Tlingit. We did get the feeling of a Tlingit voice in the Tlingit translation, but it was really difficult. So Dastia we would struggle with the verb that was needed to describe the English word, and she'd sleep on it, and the next day she'd say, I know what we need. So it turned out that we had a couple of other suggestions from a different fluent speaker too, and that was incorporated in there of a variety of verb, a different verb that kind of met the English goal. And so it was really difficult to think in Tlingit, to think in English and then speak in Tlingit. And I'm going to let you tell how you fixed that. I won't go tell that story, but it needs to be told how you fixed that voice, how you ended up fixing the voice. Am I going to have a chance to talk about things I would do differently, or later, or now? I better grab it now. Okay, in the process, say jump ahead. On my part, as the transcriber, it was my responsibility to make sure that it was written the way it was spoken. So I went back and forth with the standardized orthography. I went back and forth between the standardized orthography and the phonetic, or how you pronounce it, orthography. And this is just something to be thinking about. Almost all of the literature that's being written now is with a standardized orthography, which means that you have a shortened ending. And if you do get a copy of the book, you'll see that the title is written with the shortened ending. However, the pronunciation tends to be long with many speakers. So instead of on kahudzi, ka-askatuhudzi, shkasnigi, it's written on kahudzi, ka-askatuhudzi, shkasnigi. And so when you have a student who does not have Tlingit voice in their head, they don't know that it should be a little bit longer on the end, they're going to read it like it's written on kahudzi, ka-askatuhudzi, shkasnigi. Because we teach them each vowel has its own sound, and that's how you read it. So the whole process through the book, I wrote it long if my teacher spoke it long. Sitka tends to say their ending vowel longer anyway. So I ended up with a lot of E's on it. And at the last minute, I chickened out because there's been so much literature, wonderful, fantastic literature written with the standardized writing, where you just shorten the letter in the writing form, but you don't have to shorten it in the spoken form. But I didn't feel good about it because I knew that beginners was going to be using this book. And I felt like for beginners, they really need to get the voice in their head so that when they read this awesome literature that's out there for their education, they'll know that it's pronounced long even though it's written short. So that was the only conflict that I had in doing this. Everything else I did was an incredible growth experience for me, and even that part was insightful to me. Goodness, sheesh. Maybe could I give it to Dostiaz now? Time.
First of all, I'd like to talk about how I got involved in this. My first word was no. I wouldn't be able to do it. And they had asked me several times. Finally, I did work with Roby on Augtatzin. We worked on a book from Swanton. If you know Swanton's Tlingit spelling wasn't what we work with today. So what we try to do is put it into the spelling of today. And that was a big challenge. So when I looked at this book, I said, oh, it's going to be easy. So I said yes, but it wasn't. And it is the fact that you can write in Tlingit, and Nora was telling you earlier, it's hard translating. But also reversed, it's also hard to put English into Tlingit. That's in the book. But we some of the words that we looked up and like kasiye at, I thought, well, the proofreaders never heard of that before. But my mother, when she used to send us to the bakery, she used to say, kasiye atna'u, and she meant pastries. That's what she called it. So that's what I put in the book. But it was a challenge. It was a challenge, and like Roby said, sometimes I'd have to sleep on it and think about it, on what a word meant and how you're going to put it into Tlingit. My feeling on the book is that our forerunners, Hadakunuk, as we call them, always said that everything that we know is for our children and our grandchildren. And that's the way I felt about the book. So I went ahead and worked with Roby on it. And we spent a lot of time on it. And hopefully it came out right. Gonna cheese.
Well, now that we've brought the microphone all the way back to me, I'm going to send it down to Keri. And what we did was, after we received Ethel and Roby's translation, I gave it to a team of Juno-linguists, Keri, Eggleston, and Helen Sarabia, to prepare an English text from the Tlingit text. That's when things started to get interesting. I was just curious to know how it would read reverse translated. So Keri and Helen did a really interesting job with that. And then I took that text back to Ernestine. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Keri, could you just talk a little bit about yours and Helen's process? And also, if you could respond to Roby's comment about the short, the issue. Thank you.
Okay, Gunatish. So I sat down with Helen Sarabia with the Tlingit portion of the text, and my role was basically just to read her each line of the Tlingit translation, and then she would put it into English, and I would write it down for her. That was an interesting process. It was really fun because usually I have to go the other way from English into Tlingit, so it was a nice change. Let's see, so just a little comment on standardization and vowel length. In Tlingit, some vowel length is grammatical, so it changes the meaning whether the vowel is long or short. And in other instances, it's not grammatical, but it might be a dialect variation or personal dialect. So with the possessive suffix, like the one that Roby mentioned on kahudzi, that I or E at the end is the possessive suffix. Another example from the book would be du'ad chayi, his or her food. So as I went through and translated back into the English with Helen, I kept an eye out for any inconsistencies in spelling or any typos. And because some of these possessive suffixes were long and some were short in the book, I pretty much just went through and standardized them all to short, just so that it would be consistent, because it is the same suffix. And like Roby said, some speakers pronounce it a little longer than others, but to pronounce it long is not incorrect. To pronounce it short is not incorrect. It's really just an issue of spelling. And I think she's right that writing it short is going to avoid some of the confusion for beginning learners. Is that what you said?
That's not what I said.
Oh.
I said writing it short increases the confusion for beginner learners because they're going to read it short and they're going to say hudze, shkasnige, and a fluent speaker is going to like go, that doesn't sound right. You have an accent. In fact, Shirley Kendall said there's a new accent in town. She explained when I asked her, what do you mean? It's the college kids. They read an I short, whether it's pronounced that way by fluent speakers or not. They read what they see.
Mm-hmm. And some speakers do pronounce it short.
That's true.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a difficult issue, but I guess if you think about in English, you know, we have the West Coast accent, we have the East Coast accent. If we spelled it the way it was said in one area one way and differently in, you know, how it was pronounced in another part of the country, I think it would be a little confusing to read stuff if there wasn't a standard spelling. But it's great because this resource has an audio CD that goes along with it, so you can hear it being pronounced the way that speaker pronounces it while you read along. So, good enough, Chief.
Not really. I think, as Keri said, it's only where vowel length is important is in the verb stem and in some prefixes. But otherwise, just people pronounce them the way they do. I was going to comment on a couple of general translation things. I don't know if I'm going to do that now or. This is, I've also had very little to do with the project, so I probably shouldn't even be sitting up here, because Cassie did one of her sessions in one of our classes, and we did some proofreading, but otherwise so I shouldn't get any glory for any of this. But one of the things I do observe, though, we've worked mostly on translating the other way, I mean, translating Tlingit classics into English. But years ago, we did get permission from Schultz, the guy that did Peanuts, to do Tlingit Peanuts. And Nora took a children's literature course probably 40 years ago in Anchorage. And we do have a manuscript in Peanuts, and we were held up by a couple of things. We didn't really have a font that we could use to do comic strips. And so we kind of held, and also just none of our funding would cover it, and nobody wanted to publish it. But we do have, in fact, Schultz, or Sparky as they called him in the office, loved the World War I flying ace. Was it Up with a King Gugu or something like that? They thought that was just great. And Nora read passages of Linus with his blanket to some of her wino friends, and they said, that's just what it is. That's just what it's like, you know, with Linus trying to weed himself from his blanket. Anyhow, maybe someday. The other thing that it's very, I think, very satisfying and confidence building when people do see things they know in English. Like some of the nursery rhymes translated into Tlingit, because it's something everybody knows. It's, oh boy, I can do that in Tlingit. Sometimes it's really hard. We tried years ago in Juneau to do brown bear, what do you see? And it's very charming in English, but of course it doesn't rhyme in Tlingit. So it's kind of a flop, you know. So,
they wanted me to translate purple, and we don't have a name for purple in Tlingit. So that went out the window.
Yeah, so there are problems when you take something that's perfectly delightful and then you translate. And this is totally off the subject, but no, it's not off the subject, it's off the topic. I'm currently studying Hebrew, so I've been reading the Bible through Lent, and I always wondered where Eve came from, because I discovered in Hebrew her name is Chava. And of course, it means life. And there's this passage, I will name you Chava because you are the mother of life. And so when they were translating this into Greek, there's no cha. So they said to just drop that. And so now it becomes Eva, and I'm sure St. Jerome had something. So all through the European tradition, we end up with Adam and Eve. And so Chava went the way of but so those are the kind of examples of, what do you do with the color purple when you're translating into Tlingit. So, and also, as Keri said, English, back to the spelling issue, we say the man, but we say the apple. So we still spell T-H-E with one E in both cases. We don't put two E's when it's in front of a vowel. So it's, these things that are sort of automatic, we don't worry too much about. And I guess that's all of the spiel that for my part, was so minimal, I shall pass on to somebody.
Me? Or you? Oh, I guess it's my turn. Let me see. In the wild, I saw a lot of bears, and we ate a lot of bears, especially in the spring. So in the wild, the Graves Harbor where we wintered was the place we would get black bear. And the men would go up this one hill. I saw them go up that hill more than once. And they'd bring back black bear. And I've seen at Graves Harbor brown bear come down to the beach. And I never knew that they ate shellfish off the rocks, barnacles. They were scraping it and going. And I was really surprised. So that's the wild bears that I knew. But the city bears are very frequent in Juneau. One came on our deck. It was after bird seeds that Dick always buys for the birds. And we watch hummingbirds come and eat some of our seeds and other birds. But one of the black bears came on our deck. It was a small one, but it's scary. And Dick went and drove it off. It climbed down on the, I don't think it was a ladder, but it came up to the level of Dick's club to drive it away. And I told him, it's going to be bigger next year. And I hope, I was worried that it might come back and get him. And then a black bear was killed down by my grandchildren's children, great-grandchildren. And the kids, sometimes they grab hot dogs without cooking it, and they'd eat it out around the house. And we were happy that they weren't out there eating their wieners. Anyway, they killed the bear. This is a wild bear. This is not a city bear. But the city bear comes down to get the garbage from Juneau. And in fact, one of them came down to Red Dog Saloon for its drink. anyway, the other side is the human side is that I'm a child of a brown bear. So that goes into my culture. And I guess that's about it. The bears come down to Juneau in the spring and summer, and you hear about them. In fact, one of them came down to our church. Maybe he needs spiritual cleansing.
Paul said that bear came down to the Red Dog for happy hour. Yeah, it was interesting. At the book launch, we were talking about how these two bears, this forest bear and town bear, really represent two aspects of, they represent so many things, but one thing that I think about is they represent two aspects of most of our internal struggle. You know, and I use the example of when I come home from work at night and want to turn on the Mariners, as opposed to going for a walk up the flume. You know, that's the tension between the town bear and the forest bear. I'm always wanting to go to the woods, but there's always something in town that keeps me in town. I always want to eat the healthy food, but there's a town bear inside of me that wants to eat the trash. You know, there are many different ways that these icons work. But at the book launch, Paul actually told, do you remember that little story you told of when you had your first town bear moment coming over the bridge? Do you remember that? Do you remember that? You came over the bridge? You guys are throwing a rock. I can't remember. Well, I bet you had many town bear moments, huh? Because you guys grew up really, you were total forest bears, right? Until, you know, you got almost into your teens before you even knew there was a possibility of becoming a town bear, right? Yeah. But Paul, one of the main things that I'd like to hear from you has to do with when you went into the K2 studios with me to record that audio book, and some of the things that you discovered in the text as you started to read it for the audio disc.
Thank you. Where do I start is usually a difficult point for me because I listen to everyone else speaking and talking, and it sounds so formal to me. And the reason why it sounds so formal is because it's not the way I think. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but that's a struggle I have with when I put my Tlingit mode or Tlingit to Nitani thinking on. The struggle is between which do I allow to speak. And I think I'm letting my Tlingit speak because I'm thinking out loud with all of you. And I'm finding sometimes when I do think out loud, I put my foot in my own mouth, and I'm not really wanting to say something to hurt anyone else. It's just the process that goes through my mind. And when I was given this and asked to do the reading for this book, I studied it, and I think it was only the Tlingit part, right, you gave me. And so I didn't have the English translation, and so I couldn't. It was very difficult for me to read because it didn't seem to have the flow that I usually hear Tlingits being spoken. And Roby touched on some of the things that about the high and the low, you know, the A and the E. You know, I'm still in the old spelling ways, and so now there's a new one, and I'm kind of like new on the scene as far as what's happening today. So I'm kind of behind everyone else, but I still think that a lot of things that are happening is really, really good, you know, and I'm really enjoying this conference. We took this to the Gold Belt Heritage Committee trustees, and one of the members mentioned that this is cutting edge stuff. You know, and I when he said that, I remembered it, and I wanted to keep it in my mind, and I just couldn't think of that word anymore. And then I was sitting just a couple of days ago, somebody says cutting edge. That's the word. So, you know, in Tlingit Tundatani too, is that, you know, the answer will come if you keep looking, just like the word says, seek and you shall find, you know, ask and it, you know, be given. But I enjoyed reading this, and I suppose I could relate to it. Being raised on Mark's Trail was more or less like a village. It was our own village. We were very protected there. And my backyard was way up in the meadow. We'd run, as kids, we'd run all the way up to the meadow as, you know, as quickly as we could and play around up there. I remember one time we found these little rabbits running around, and we put them in a box or in the side of our coats and took them home. I don't know whatever happened to them. I must have got in trouble for it, because when I get in trouble, I don't remember things. That wasn't me. I don't remember. But so when I did go to the city, you know, I was introduced to a lot of stuff I wasn't used to. But it was kind of a thing like, if you didn't do what they did, you were a chicken. You know, well, I knew one thing, I wasn't a chicken. Well, I'm not scared, but I didn't know you could get in trouble. In a sense, I knew, but I didn't know exactly how bad the trouble could be. But I just wanted to say that the language to me is changing, but I'm also changing too with the language. And all those that are involved in writing in the languages are doing a really good job. And I'm so thankful that Nora was able to translate a lot of our traditional stories. A lot of knowledge is inside of those stories. And this is Tlingit Tundatani. This is thinking Tlingit, you know, and it's in the modern way, but it's, you know, we are modern and we still can think Tlingit, you know, and I really appreciate this story. But anyway, I guess going back is that it took me a while to get into the rhythm of it. But as I practiced and began to see, I probably said Hudzi with the E, you know. So, and when they tried to correct me, I said, that's not the way I said, I know it. But these things are changing faster than I think it is changing, I guess. Because a lot of things, I think, when I hear this being Tlingit, is we always listened very carefully, because that's what we were taught to do, is listen. And I think a lot of our language, just like English language, when you say certain words, if they're just a word you're reading, you just read it like that. But when you're using the words, there are high tones and low tones in that word. And I think that's the same way with I feel like that's the same way with our language. Sometimes it depends on how you want to emphasize the word. So it's not always the same. I hope I'm not right, I'm not wrong, but that's the way I feel. Because sometimes when I use a Tlingit word, it changes the tone. And I remember my brother Johnny, when he would talk to me, when he was really either wanting to be jokeful with me, his tones were different. Or when he was serious, it would be different. But I knew they were the same words, but in different tones. So what I'm saying is I don't want to be putting just the high tone there and don't change it. I think it changes. I just wanted to add that. And I'm not trying to go against anyone, but that's just my way of thinking, and that's the way I feel. And so that was partially the problem when I was reading this for me, because I couldn't get, because I think I was thinking Tlingit in the way the bear was doing things is the way I wanted to emphasize those different tones. And trying to think back how my brother Johnny would talk to me, you know, I'm starting to shake because I really love my brother John. He taught me a lot. We used to sit and watch TV, and he would translate what was being said on the TV into Tlingit, and it's just so much funnier, but it was serious. It was kind of a serious thing on the TV, but it wasn't serious when it turned into Tlingit. It was like, oh, whoa, look at that. But anyway, I thank you for listening, and I thank you for asking me to sit on this panel and to be able to sit with all these wonderful people who are bringing back and helping us to continue on with our language. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, very much. I know that we're probably over time. I lost track of when we began, so I'm blaming that on my head cold. But I would like to hear, there's another area we'd like to get into, but I really want to hear from Marcia about what it's been like to use this project in the classroom. But as the mic's going by, Cassie, Cassie, if you have anything you'd like to say about your experience with the project, just chime in, okay? Or at any time, just wave at me. Down to Marcia, please.
I teach Tlingit language at the university to young adults, and at the beginning of the first semester, I had already decided to read the book to them, just read it to them. And so I kind of started it, but I just wanted them to see how cute the story was. I enjoyed it. Next thing I knew, the students came in and said, was it Native American Month? And we're going to have Askatuhudzi. And next thing I knew, they were going to read it. And I was panicking, and it was already out there. And I was like, guys, it's going to take a long time. And so it actually took us the whole summer the semester to get ready just to read in November. But the students really enjoyed it. To tell you the truth, as a speaker, I did have problems grammatically, the way things were. I understand what the speakers, the translators went through. And even I could hear, when we were listening to the audio, I could even hear Paul and Florence kind of switching things, and the way I was teaching some of the students, and I said, I would say it this way, so, you know, kind of I was pointing things out that was wrong with the sentence, but we had to do it like this. And I'm not saying anything, you know, but for the way I was trying to teach them, I sometimes had to flip the whole paragraph and say, this is probably where you're going to put your noun, and you're going to flip it. And I understand how they had felt like they had to do it. My encouragement to those that do translate little books or little stories, just take the content, redo it. Don't be afraid, because that's English. Just harling get you a tongue, hayat e has duin, has siku idin. Kutbuguchi, jayat le kayach, kauntu shahi di chatlap. What I said was, when you do get a chance to translate, I encourage speakers, just take the content, work it, just get the idea. You don't go for word, because you lose the whole pair. Can I pick at something? Like one of the pages, he thought, this forest bear, I've never had it so easy. And then in the Tlingit, ye tundi shot, ya aska tu chudzi, kunach seweke, tlech ulzi at cha yao dlag. If I were saying it, I was just sharing with Ethel. I said, if you were just going to say this sentence the way you normally would, I kind of think it would go something like this. Ya aska tu chudzi, yewe tundi shot. Tlech ulzi ya at cha yao dudlaki. You know, just take it and do it the way you would do it. Don't, because for those of us that have to, that we're going to use it for teaching, the story's wonderful. And I like it even into the second semester. Some of the students will, when we're learning new phrases, they'll say, oh, that's what Oskar Tuhudzi said. So, Gunnachish. And it was fun. Just to add to Nora's story, in the chill camp, the bears, generational bears, they come fishing and they frog the nets. We in the summertime we fish the Chilkat River, and so the bears would pull the nets up, and pretty soon, years later, a year later or two, pretty soon these bears were pushing the net back out because they knew once they get the fish out, they can get more by getting it out there. And then a few years later, when the fisherman who owns that net, the bears would be guarding their net, which can be, so they're very smart.
Do you mind if I mention Rhonda? I'd like to mention the artist that did the work on the book, Wanda Culp. She's a relative of mine. Her mother was a cousin to me, and for the Tlingit speakers, her father was Harold Bailey, who comes from the Koho house. I think because, you had Tlingit people working on your book, and I'm talking to the editor, it was a challenge. I thought, well, earlier when I spoke, I said, it's going to be a pot of beans. It's going to be easy because I worked for the Sitka Native Education Program for 20 years under Isabella Brady. Some of the teachers are sitting back there, and we had a bunch of out-of-town ladies that came to see us, and we were on a break, and we started telling them about Mother Goose in Tlingit. We got in trouble for it. So I thought, well, this will be easy to do, but it is a challenge. And like Marcia said, if you're a speaker, you can put it another way, but they'll still be correct. Gonna see.
Okay, I guess I'll say a little bit. I don't feel like I helped out a whole lot with the project, but I was really excited to be able to help out with the beginning portion, and the recording part was really cool too. My mom and I worked on the radio station at the studio there on the recordings, and I really didn't expect to be part of the recording at the end, but that was pretty cool too. So, Gulchish.
I'd like to add that this is a very good problem to have. And any of you who've read foreign literature like Crime and Punishment or, for example, translations of the Odyssey, there's maybe 3 or 4, or there's something like 30 translations of Beowulf out there. So in the Bible, how many translations there are. So, and they're all good, but they're all different. And I just flashed on the first translations of the Ten Commandments into Tlingit by Willard and Kelly, and one of the commandments was, don't be happy. Can you think which one that one is? That's thou shalt not commit adultery is, don't be happy. And the other one, don't make totem poles. That's graven images. They shall have no graven images. But it comes out as, they use the word kutia. So anyhow, I just want to admonish you guys on a Sunday morning, don't be happy and don't make totem poles.
Can I talk? Okay. Can I add? I just wanted to add that now that it's coming to berry time, before we go into the woods as women, we talk to the bears. One year, not too long ago, I got invited to go to Hoona to pick berries with the women. And the first thing they did was talk to the bears. They're telling me to talk to the bears. So I did. I talked the best way I know how. And we went in. And when we went in, there was a lot of bear signs. The ferns were all toppled over. The berry bushes were all torn up and stuff like that. But we didn't see any. Maybe they heard us. We really believe we have to talk to the bears.
Goodness, Chish, and I would just like to say also, certainly if you see, I love the idea that when you're working with these words, that you put your own interpretation and your own voice, and you say this is the way that it would be said where I come from or in my family, because that keeps it alive. It keeps the life in it. And individually, just as a person who wrote something down, I'm honored and thrilled that it is not the place to stop, it's the place to begin. So, Gunnar Chish.
This is a really good conference, and I'm so thankful that I'm here with all of you today. And there's a word I want to bring up this before we close here is hashagun. And if you ever heard Austin Hammond put this documentary or film together, and they filmed him, and the word they used was hashagun. And my other brother, Horace Marks, translated it, and they used his voice in there. His translation was that what our people were and what we are today and what our children must become. With our children, and my grandma, Cleet Quay, put a voice to those children crying out. Our ancestors are crying out because they need to have names. They need to belong. They need to be back home with us, just like the elders were crying out, repatriation of our atu. But we have a living shagun, our ancestors out there that need homes. They need Tlingit names. They need to know and have a clan. We don't know which clan they are, but families can adopt them and make them their clan. This is my plea for them today, that our clan leaders would begin to think about those things that our people are facing, our children are facing, because we all need to feel that we belong. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, all the panelists, for a wonderful discussion. I can't think of a moment when I've felt happier that we embarked on this project. And I encourage all teachers who are here, get out your black marker, make this text your own, make it work for you. We made mistakes along the way. If we had to do it again, that's the biggest lesson we learned, Marcia, was that tell the elder what the story is, what the concept is. Allow the voice to come through of the original language. A language isn't, as everyone here knows, a language isn't just a language, it's a way of thinking. And the only way you're going to get the way of thinking to come across in the text is, I think, number one, you use a Tlingit author to begin with because it was Ernestine's childhood memory of the language that made her write the story the way she wrote it. And then use, elders to translate so you can get that voice, and use general concepts and let them tell the story the way the story would be told. If it's going to go onto paper, write it down that way, the way it would have sounded in the oral tradition. Very important lessons. That's why we wanted to come and present today. Thank you all for listening to us, and thank you again, everyone, for helping me. Very good. Sheesh.